Marvel Snap's latest patch just dropped, and there are actually some seriously impactful changes in this one. Let's take a look at what might be the new best tech card in the game. When you install this patch, Shadow King will have the same text, but they have made one incredibly important functionality change to him, and that is that Luke Cage will no longer prevent Shadow King's power reduction. Now, this can be seen as both a buff and a nerf. Many Shadow King decks have included Luke Cage in order to prevent it from negatively impacting their own cards. An example of this would be the No-Key deck from a few metas ago, the Loki-less Loki deck that was playing both Shadow King and Luke Cage in a small package that Shadow King helped allow to compete against decks that could go taller. Now, this also overlapped with various other Luke Cage functionalities. This was not the necessarily most important one, but it was a reasonable thing. The thing is, when Shadow King gets too good, and here's why it might be a buff, Luke Cage does tend to come back into the meta as a sort of Shadow King prophylactic, and that role is now no longer there for Luke Cage. Things have been shifting in favor of Shadow King in small ways for a while now. The change to the Ebony Blade, for example, allows Shadow King to deal with it, but not Shang-Chi. And now this means Luke Cage can't prevent your Shadow King from actually activating and affecting your opponent's cards. The reason I think this could have a chance to be one of the best cards in terms of tech pieces in Marvel Snap right now is that the best decks in the game do actually have a ton of green power in them. Green power here being a synonym for gained power in the game Marvel Snap. You know, it shows up green when your power goes over what you originally had. Examples include Thena, Blob, Angela, Elsa Bloodstone, their Gwenpool. I have so many examples of how this card can meaningfully interact with the metagame. There are a ton of cards that are gaining what we would call, I guess, temporary power, non-ongoing power, because Shadow King doesn't work on cards like Ajax and Darkhawk, but it does work on a wide variety of commonly played cards in the metagame right now. Shadow King, additionally, and this might be its most important role, is extremely good against the card Cassandra Nova. Whether you're an Arishem deck that is looking to make sure that Cassandra Nova goes from a 319 to a 3-1, or a normal deck looking to make sure that Cassandra Nova goes from a 3-7 to a 3-1, this is going to be a relevant piece of your repertoire. If you can throw priority, you can even hit big targets like Sage and Hitmonkey, and maybe even a Rocket Raccoon that might get big enough to actually really matter. Now, you will be able to do this with impunity. And I know some people are watching this and they're saying, KM, you were already able to do all those things, and that didn't really stop people from running Shadow King. One thing that I really want to point out in Marvel Snap is the way in which sort of theoretical counters depress the play rate of a card. A card like Shadow King is hard to put in your deck because what if? What if that Arishem opponent randomly generates the Luke Cage? What if your opponent is the one person actually playing it? When a card has an obvious, really strong, really relevant counter in the metagame that you can lose to, and you don't know what your opponent's deck list contains, it does meaningfully get worse. Not just in terms of how you actually feel about putting the card in the deck, although it also feels worse, it actually does meaningfully get worse, especially in a metagame where Luke Cage can be randomly generated from an Arishem. This change removes not just the fear, the feels, but also the reals of that. There are no counters to this anymore. If it has green power, it's going away. And that kind of real confidence that you can have in your plays is actually very meaningful. I personally think that these sort of theoretical counters, the ways in which players think about the game, are a lot more impactful to the metagame than we really realize. People don't want to play stuff that they could get blown out because they're playing it. And now, just having the confidence of Shadow King is going to do what I set out to do with it, that's a really big deal. And this card was already, I think, moving into a position, thanks to Cassandra Nova, of being metagame relevant again. There is probably more green power right now than we have had in a very long time. Again, thanks to Cassandra Nova, but also Thena and Angela and Blob. Major threats in these decks are green power oriented, and I do think that it's good that they're buffing a card that can really beat the crap out of that. I'm really excited to see what Shadow King can do, because Yes, he is probably never going to be as ubiquitous as Shang-Chi. Almost every deck is going to put something on the board that Shang-Chi can hit because points are how you win games of Marvel Snap. But the most efficient points engines in Snap right now are ones that get hit by Shadow King, and Shadow King costs half of what Shang-Chi does, and that is extremely, extremely meaningful. I cannot wait to experiment with this card. Uatu the Watcher is finally reaching the apex of his power. He will now show every location to you at the beginning of the game. The issue is including a 1-2 in your deck is still just a really meaningful cost to pay. And I'd like to talk to you a little bit about why that is. Why is it that a 1-2 is such a meaningful cost to pay and a 3-5 isn't? And I think a lot of people have been noticing, hey, 3-5, 3-5. There's a lot of good 3-5s. If you want a card to be good, they can just put a 3-5 stat line on it. Hell, even Black Swan is seeing play now. It's proof that the 3-5 stat line works. It's very hard to find any 3-5 that is as bad as Uatu. We have Viper, we have Zemo, we have Black Swan for the bad ones. All of them are better. So why is it better to be a 3-5 or maybe even a 3-4 than it is to be a 1-2? The answer is honestly, I think, a little bit deceptively simple. 2 is not a lot of power. When you are spending an entire card, 1/12 of your deck on something with 2 power, you need to be getting something else back from that. It's not necessarily the issue of it being a 1-2, it's the issue of it not really meaningfully affecting any location that it goes into. Especially in a metagame like this, where there are legitimately decks that are looking to clog you up. So you put a 1-2 down, suddenly your opponent White Widows that location, you have 2 spots left with which to work, and you have effectively 2 power across those 2 spots. It's not a good situation to be in. It's not only not worth it from a deck building 1 out of 12 perspective, but it's often not worth it in addition from a board allocation perspective and even an energy perspective. For example, let's say you played 4 Uatus. That would be, that's like a good rate, right? 4-8, that's a good rate. The issue is your opponent is just going to be able to play, I don't know, the Hulk or whatever on that location. The issue Uatu has, and I think the issue a lot of smaller cards that don't meaningfully impact the board have, is not necessarily their cost, but functionally it's their size. It is hard to find a card that is doing something meaningful at a small size that isn't, allowing you to accelerate more onto the board, something like a Ravonna Renslayer, or an Elsa Bloodstone type card that is providing power to other cards, or Athena that is providing power to itself, or a Kitty Pryde that is the engine of a deck that is providing more pieces of power to other cards, right? Decks don't play cards like this. And I'm not sure if that's like an oversight or anything like that, because I do think that there are worlds where this is an actually meaningful effect. I think especially, this is one of the weird situations. I often say there's very little difference between Ladder and Conquest. This is a card that is going to legitimately be better in Conquest than Ladder. This is a card that people will talk themselves into running, but ultimately I fear that its stat line will make it so that it simply is not worth putting in your deck or putting on the board. And I'm not exactly sure what could be done to fix that. Okay, I am exactly sure what could be done to fix that. If you made Uatu the Watcher a 3-5 and had this ability, it would be really good. Stop me before I make every 1-2 that sucks into a 3-5. I've thought about this a lot. You're going to have to listen to me talk about it for 30 seconds. If you made Howard the Duck a 3-5, I am like pretty sure he would be playable because he'd be a 3-5 with an ongoing ability. And I think there are so many cool abilities that are stuck on 1-2s and 1-1s that never really actually get to see play because they are 1-2s and 1-1s. And there's this fundamental issue where I feel like 5 is basically the breakpoint for this is a meaningful amount of points to use a slot in a lane on. That's what you want. That's like the minimum to be impactful. And anything below that, you have to be giving something else to the player. You have to be doing like Ravonna stuff or Hope stuff, right? You need to be more than that. And it feels like the way that the board space economy works out, it's impossible to play 1-2s. But if we put like Howard the Duck on a 3-5, we put Uatu on a 3-5, then we'd be talking. I got boxes full of Pepe Sylvia. Moon Knight is getting a fairly intriguing buff, going from a random discard to a card that discards only even cost. This is a really interesting card because it does strike me as the kind of thing where it's like, this is going to be hard to target on your own cards by turn 3. It's going to be difficult to actually set that up such that you are guaranteed to only hit the thing you actually want to hit, unless you're only somehow running even cost cards in your deck. Or it's only running like one even cost card in your deck. I don't really know if that's possible. I am put in the mindset of the old Bakugan decks in Hearthstone. I don't think you can do that in this game. But I am sort of struck by the fact that this hits Swarm, this hits Apocalypse, that is meaningful. It doesn't hit MODOK, it doesn't hit Lady Sif, that is meaningful. It is disrupting your opponent, that is also meaningful. And then I start thinking about the other stuff though, right? Like, okay, let's say I want to go all in on discarding stuff from my opponent, right? Okay, I would like to play Black Bolt and I would like to play that looks good. It's an odd cost card. I'd like to play Stature. It's an odd cost card. I'd like to play Silver Samurai. I can't play Silver Samurai because then I might discard my Silver Samurai with this. I'd like to play X23 and Dakin, but I want to be discarding X23 and Dakin, and this doesn't let me do that. And I find it hard to like math out this guy having a home, basically. I don't know what the deck looks like. I am conceptually interested in effects like this because discarding cards in your opponent's hand while you get upside, if we get to a critical mass of that, that does seem like it could be a really powerful strategy where you are playing these decent bodies and your opponent has just completely run out of resources. A curve of something like Moon Knight into Silver Samurai into Black Bolt. I mean, like, you're discarding like a third of the cards your opponent is going to see over the course of the entire game. That's really, really, really meaningful. The issue is you need to be able to set up a situation where that isn't also hurting you about as bad as them. And I can't figure out a way to get all of them in the same deck and actually have that situation happen. I could be wrong. Maybe you can just, do that. Maybe you can just be like, it's fine. I'm going to discard all your stuff. It's going to work out perfectly. It's going to be great. But I am struck by visions of discarding my own Silver Samurai instead of discarding my Swarm and just sort of crying myself to sleep and immediately losing the game because now I've discarded my Silver Samurai instead of my Swarm. If I discarded my Swarm, the Silver Samurai, maybe it would have hit the Swarm next turn. Like, it's just hard to make things make sense in that way, to me at least. I'm also sitting here wondering if there's maybe something you can do with, like, Ghost Rider, but the issue that comes with is Ghost Rider is an even cost. You probably can't do anything with Ghost Rider. If I had to guess, this maybe ends up going in like a Hela deck, but you don't tend to want to run cards that risk discarding your Hela, right? And this always will, whereas something like Lady Sif will hit death or Colleen Wing will hit something smaller. Maybe it's just an acceptable thing, but I think most of the time if you're going to be risking discarding your Hela, you might as well play Corvus Glaive instead. So basically, I am conceptually into this way of approaching Moon Knight's power, but it does seem a little bit harder to actually make happen to me. In a pure discard deck, like the Apocalypse kind, you're running the risk of, maybe discarding a Dracula, right? In a non-sort of pure discard deck, a disruptive Black Bolt style deck, you're running the risk of discarding your Silver Samurai or Shang-Chi, things like that. You kind of need those. And I'm not really sure what other homes this would possibly have. It's kind of fascinating because it's definitely a nice piece of text to have in the game, but this card is either going to be like 10% chance it ends up incredibly powerful and really strong, and that kind of discard all your stuff deck ends up being really good, and 90% chance this doesn't actually change anything about Moon Knight at all. Finally, Blink is getting a minor change, and among other changes that are happening to the way in which cost is interpreted in Marvel Snap, which I'll talk about a little bit in the future, but Blink is one that is actually getting a gameplay change. What Blink will do now is see the actual cost of a card in your deck as opposed to the cost of a card that what it says on the card. And what that means is like stuff like Pixie and Mr. Negative. Instead of seeing, let's say, Iron Man as a 5-cost card, she will see that inverted Iron Man as a 0-cost card, which actually what it does mostly is make Blink notably worse with cards like Pixie and Mr. Negative. I don't think anyone was actually doing that, but if you were playing a Pixie Blink deck, and I do think it is possible that people were playing a Pixie Blink deck, that they were playing, like Jane Foster Thor type stuff with Pixie and Lockjaw in it, that could actually be a meaningful change, because what it will mean is instead of getting the big thing that you really wanted out of it, it will be very likely, or not necessarily likely, but it will now be much more possible to get a small thing that had its cost changed to be the cost of the big thing. So, in terms of Dexys effects, I honestly think I've only ever seen this happen in one deck, and that is the Pixie Jane Foster Thor archetype. That's the only thing I could think of that is running both Pixie and Blink. But it is actually kind of going to matter in that. I'm sorry. It wasn't like a great deck to begin with, and now it's taking not necessarily a needless hit, but needless in terms of balance for sure. Now, this is only one note in terms of how they're changing their costs. So let's talk a little bit about how costs are going to work in Marvel Snap as they are referred to on cards. Now, the way cost works in Marvel Snap is when there is a hyphenated cost, it refers to the actual cost of the card. For example, Khazar buffs one cost cards. You'll notice if you look at Khazar, it says one dash cost, hyphenated and capitalized. It buffs cards that have a cost of one, regardless of if, say, Dream Dimension hit them and they cost two, or Iceman hit them and they cost two. It looks at the number that's on the card and it says, oh, that's a one cost card. What they've introduced with several cards is some inconsistency into that they are now fixing. They are swapping a lot of the text that says highest cost to card that costs the most, and a lot of the text that says lowest cost to card that costs the least. Blink was the only one of these that actually was a functional change. All the cards will work the way you remember them, but they are simply text updates to cards like Yondu and Jane Foster. They will work the same, however, they will simply be worded slightly differently so as to not be confusing. The other major thing that's happening in this update is alliances. So by the time you've watched this video, as far as I'm aware, alliances are dropping with this patch and not with the server rollover, meaning by the time you watch this video, you can probably already see that alliances are going to be happening. I can tell you that I personally am looking to set up my group of friends as an alliance, but I am also going to try to make sure there are alliances for, my fans, the members of my Discord server. It sounds horrifically arrogant to say stuff like that. I really don't like saying it, but if you want to start a KM Best themed clan and you want me to front you the 100 gold, just let me know and I will try to find a way to front you the 100 gold, probably Cash App or something like that, not sponsored. It's actually just the one I use because it doesn't actually dox me, unlike PayPal. If I have to send you money on PayPal, it will actually dox me. Maybe I can also buy you it on the web shop. I'm not actually sure. The point is, I'm very willing to front the cost for anyone who's looking to set up a KMB themed alliance, a Besties themed alliance. I'm incredibly grateful that people actually want to do that. It is honestly shocking to me and a little bit horrifying to me that people would want to do that, but I'm incredibly grateful that they do. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart to everyone who is interested in doing that. It blows my mind that I have fans. It blows my mind that I have the level of attention that I do. It is continually shocking, and I won't say it's humbling because I ain't humble, but it honestly is, like, it is a little bit humbling. Like, it's a little bit weird. It's something that I is an odd thing to deal with, and I'm very grateful for, and I'm trying to do more to show it. So if that's you, leave a comment, let me know, and I will try to figure something out with you. Obviously, the best way to get in touch with me, for the record, I don't know if I've said this enough, is in my Discord. It's linked in basically all of my socials. It's a very active Marvel Snap community. Thousands of people in there, but I am very active in it. And so if you really want to get in touch with me, that is a way that you can do it. Of course, thank you so much for making it this far in the video. As far as the actual patch, I gotta tell you, a little bit surprised that they put actual patch stuff into a patch. I've been under the impression at this point they were just putting all the actual changes in OTAs and not really worrying about doing anything in the patch. So I guess I have to make this video and then another video on Thursday for the OTA. So this is a big week for Marvel Snap changes, which is good because there's no actual new cards coming out this week. So I guess it's good that they're making, like, presumably multiple layers of changes on both a patch and an OTA. I would like to know what other people think about that though, because to me it seems like there's a potential for it to be a little bit confusing. So please do let me know what you think about the patch and the OTA being in the same week and also kind of both having changes in them. Obviously, I'm super excited about Shadow King. I think that's going to be super awesome. And let me know again as well if you liked how I talked in this video. I wanted to talk about like sort of some more conceptual stuff, why it was that I thought this would be a big change for Shadow King, even though it doesn't look like a big change for Shadow King, why 1-2 sucks, some more theoretical stuff rather than just here's what happened, here's what I think about it. So let me know if you like that. Thank you so much. I've been KM Best. You have been phenomenal. Remember to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.